What if I told you the storm that hit Gaza wasn't just rainfall, but a new battlefield? A battlefield where freezing rain, collapsing tents, malfunctioning drones, and desperate families turned the night into a war zone of nature itself. What if I told you the people who survived missiles now fear the sky for an entirely new reason? Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. The night began with thunder rolling over Gaza like distant artillery. To the displaced families living in torn tents, every thunderclap sounded like an airstrike. Every flash of lightning looked at cameras scanning for targets. For a population already pushed beyond human limits, the storm became an enemy with no mercy and no ceasefire. Wind ripped through the refugee camps like a low-flying jet, tearing plastic sheets off makeshift shelters. Families rushed to grab what little they had left: a battered blanket, a tin pot, a child's wet jacket, trying to hold their world together as torrents of cold rain hammered down. The ground, already scarred by months of conflict, quickly turned into thick mud. Children sank to their ankles. Adults slipped under the weight of soaked clothes. Elderly people struggled to stay upright. When the storm intensified, puddles became streams, and streams became floods. Water poured into tents as if the sky was deliberately trying to drown out the last sparks of hope. Flashlights flickered. Phone batteries died. The only light remaining came from the unnatural glow of military drones hovering overhead, their infrared sensors cutting through the dark as if observing the misery below. Every displaced family felt the same fear had destroyed what little shelter the war had allowed them to create. But the storm didn't only bring misery, it also brought danger from above. Gaza's skies are dense with unmanned aircraft, surveillance drones, reconnaissance jets, and noise from distant armored vehicle movements. Normally, people learn to interpret the sounds that this drone means surveillance, that distant rumble means tanks repositioning. But last night, the storm masked everything. Families could no longer separate rain from rockets, thunder from airstrikes, wind from incoming jets. Confusion isn't just frightening, it's deadly. And as the storm raged on, the world saw something chill in nature merging with warfare, creating a night that nobody in Gaza will ever forget. As the storm intensified, Gaza's military landscape changed instantly. Rainwater seeped in the electronics of unmanned ground vehicles left abandoned near broken infrastructure. Drone operators struggled to maintain signal clarity as thick clouds created interference, weakening navigation systems. For a region where surveillance never sleeps, this sudden technological disruption created a rare moment of unpredictability. In the dim light of breaking tents, people heard a different kind of buzzing, not the usual surveillance quadcopters, but heavy, storm-battered military drones forced to fly lower than usual. Their red blinking lights reflected on the wet ground, making the mud glow disturbingly. The sound of their engines mixed with the wind, creating an eerie soundtrack of machine and storm. Some families reported seeing armored personnel carriers in the distance, headlights slicing through rain like glowing blades. The storm distorted the sounds. What normally would announce itself with the metallic crunch of tank tracks was now muffled under the relentless downpour. Visibility for these machines dropped drastically. Thermal imaging struggled against the icy rain, and night vision optics fogged over. War machines designed for precision suddenly became clumsy beasts in the storm. But for displaced families, this didn't make things safer. Because when technology malfunctions in a war zone, chaos follows. Lightning cracked across the sky, remaining the shattered remains of neighborhoods. For a moment, the whole landscape flashed white: torn tents, broken metal, scattered shoes, muddy blankets, collapsed beams, and families huddled under sheets of plastic trying to shield small children. And then darkness swallowed everything again. People moved from tent to tent, shouting names into the storm, trying to locate missing relatives dragged by the wind or pushed by water currents. The storm made every step dangerous. The mud acted like glue, refusing to let go of people's feet. Sharp fragments of rubble hid beneath the surface, cutting into the legs of those who could barely lift their steps. The night felt endless. The storm only grew heavier. The cold cut through skin like glass, and through all of this, military aircraft continued to patrol above, jets leaving ghostly trails of sound behind the thunder, helicopters slicing through the air in short intervals, drones blinking like mechanical stars in a sky already heavy with grief. What Gaza faced wasn't just rainfall. It was weather weaponized by circumstance, turning an already devastated population into victims of a new, relentless enemy. As dawn approached, the storm showed no signs of mercy. Satellite images later revealed dense cloud formations swirling over Gaza like a colossal gray vortex. Meteorologists warned that this wasn't a normal winter storm. This was a multi-layered system capable of producing high winds, localized flooding, and potentially dangerous lightning clusters. But inside the camps, nobody needed weather analysis. They felt the storm's wrath firsthand. The ground turned into a battlefield of water. Mud walls collapsed. Tents sank. Makeshift kitchens flooded. Children cried from the cold that sank into their bones. People couldn't light fires. Everything was soaked. Even the smallest comfort, a cup of tea, became impossible. Meanwhile, the military presence intensified. Tanks rolled slowly across wet ground, their metal trades leaving deep scars in the soil. The storm made movement difficult, but armored vehicles were still out there, brutal silhouettes against the flickering streetlights. APC engines growled in the distance, carrying vibrations through the wet earth. In the sky, powerful reconnaissance aircraft flew at low altitudes, their engines roaring like dragons. The sound vibrated against the storm clouds, echoing across the refugee camps. Some families covered their ears, expecting the worst. The psychological toll of hearing jets during a natural disaster cannot be overstated. The brain associates every loud sound with danger. At the same time, thermal-guided drones attempted to regain stable flight patterns. Their sensors struggled to differentiate between human heat signatures and soaked ground reflections. Occasionally, flashes of red and green lights appeared through the clouds, blinking erratically. Down below, parents pressed their children close, whispering comforting lies just to keep them calm. It's only rain. It's only thunder. It's only noise. We're safe here. But everyone knew they weren't safe. Not from the weather, not from the cold, not from the machines above. The storm turned everyday survival into a full-scale emergency. People used broken wood beams to redirect water out of their tents. They stacked empty food cans to create makeshift pathways across the mud. Some placed blankets over holes in their roofs, even though the blankets were already soaked. When a sudden gust of wind tore through the camp, multiple tents collapsed. Families scrambled to pull them back up, but the storm kept knocking them down like dominoes. Children slipped in the mud. Elderly people shivered uncontrollably, their thin clothes no match for the freezing air. The storm did not discriminate. It consumed everything. And for Gaza's displaced families, this night of storms became a nightmare woven from both nature and war, leaving them trapped between the sky's fury and the machines that never leave the air. By midday, the intensity of the storm exposed deeper cracks, not just in the infrastructure, but in the fragile humanitarian situation. Emergency supplies were already stretched thin before the storm. Now, tents needed replaced and blankets were ruined, food stocks were drenched. Medical kits were contaminated by floodwater. Clean water, nearly impossible. In some areas, armored convoys attempted to reposition, their engines struggling against thick mud. Heavy machinery left deep trenches along the roads, turning them into channels where water gathered and overflowed. An armored bulldozer pushed debris aside, but each movement sent large waves of muddy water splashing into the tents lining the road. Above all of this, drone activity remained constant. Multiple UAVs hovered across the skyline, their propellers visibly fighting the wind. For families below, the storm combined with the mechanical buzzing created a sensory overload, too loud to ignore, too terrifying to process. People shouted into the storm for help, but the wind stole their voices. Babies cried but went unheard beneath the roaring skies. Mothers tried to calm them, rubbing their tiny hands to warm them, but the humidity and cold made every touch feel like ice. And then came the twist no one expected, a sudden drop in temperature. A freezing wave that turned rainfall into icy pellets. For a moment, it felt like the storm itself transformed into something even crueler. The sharp, cold rain stung people's faces. Children huddled under blankets that had already soaked through. Adults rubbed their arms to generate body heat, but the cold drained them faster than they could fight it. The storm became a silent thief, stealing warmth, stealing strength, stealing hope. Military analysts later confirmed that even advanced systems struggled in this weather. High-altitude surveillance aircraft had to adjust their flight paths. Wind patterns forced drones to abort routes. Ground vehicles moved slower, radar systems suffered interference, but none of these technical difficulties offered relief to the families below. The storm punished them equally. War punished them relentlessly. And now nature had joined the onslaught. It felt like Gaza had become a place where even the sky had turned against the innocent. As afternoon faded, the storm left behind a landscape that looked like the aftermath of a natural disaster battlefield. Tents lay shredded. Roads turned unrecognizable. Pools of water reflected broken beams, twisted metal, and scattered belongings. Families crawled out of what remained of their shelters and assessed the damage with hollow eyes. Many had lost everything. Again, the little they had gathered since displacement was washed away in a single night. But the emotional damage was far worse. The storm forced families to relive every moment of fear from the war. Every explosion, every rush to find cover, every sneak listening for jets overhead. Trauma returned like a ghost, haunting them through every thunderclap. Meanwhile, the sky remained crowded with war machines. Helicopters circled, drones resumed stable flight. Jets roared through the upper atmosphere, leaving trails across the storm clouds. It didn't matter that the storm had weakened. The psychological pressure remained unbroken. And yet, amidst all this chaos, something heartbreaking happened. Families began rebuilding, again, with bare hands. Adults dug trenches to redirect the remaining water. Children helped collect sticks to reinforce collapsed tents. People used whatever they could salvage: broken tarps, discarded metal sheets, soggy cardboard, bent poles. They tied knots with frayed ropes, pressing their weight against the fabric to stretch it tight. The storm had torn their world apart, but not their will to fight for survival. However, the worst twist came when night temperature dropped. The wind returned. The clouds regrouped. A second wave was coming. Families clutched their chests, staring at the sky in disbelief. They had no strength left, no dry clothes left, no safe shelter left. Some whispered prayers. Others simply stood silent, accepting whatever came next. Because when the sky becomes an enemy, where does one hide? As the night returned, the atmosphere felt heavier than the storm itself. Families braced for another assault of rain, wind, and cold. The sound of approaching thunder echoed across the camps like distant tanks, each rumble shaking the ground lightly. Children curled into their parents' arms, trembling not only from the cold, but from fear. Meanwhile, the military presence continued overhead, jets slicing through the dark, drones blinking like watchful predators, and the unmistakable vibration of helicopters beating their way through the night sky. It didn't matter whether their purpose was surveillance or repositioning, the psychological effect remained the same. The sky was never silent. Rain began again softly at first, tapping on the broken tents like hesitant footsteps, but within minutes it escalated into a merciless downpour. Water surged through the pathways, carrying away small objects. Shoes, food wrappers, bits of tent fabric scattered returned instantly. People rushed to resecure their shelters. They used stones to weigh down corners of tents. They tied ropes tighter. Even though their fingers were numb, they positioned their bodies against thin walls of fabric to shield children from the wind. The storm punished them without pause. Floodwater seeped into everything. Food bags, clothes, bedding. Babies cried uncontrollably as their tiny bodies lost heat quickly. Adults huddled around them, forming a human shield against the cold, even though they were freezing themselves. Above the storm, a fighter jet thundered across the sky, its engines shaking the air. The sound blended with the storm so perfectly that nobody knew whether to fear the rain or the roar. That confusion, the inability to distinguish weather from warfare, became a new psychological weapon. Lightning flashed, illuminating the camp. For a split second, everything was visible: collapsed tents, flooded pathways, exhausted parents, terrified children, and above all, the flickering silhouettes of military aircraft cutting through the clouds. The storm had created a terrifying fusion between nature and conflict, a reality where rain felt weaponized, cold felt intentional, darkness felt hunted. But amid this nightmare, the resilience of the people stood unbroken. Families formed groups, sharing what little warmth they had. Some used scraps of wood to lift sleeping children off the wet ground. Others stood outside, letting themselves get soaked just so someone vulnerable could stay slightly drier inside. Hope didn't disappear. It shivered, but it survived. And as the storm continued to rage across Gaza, one truth echoed louder than the thunder: these families are enduring a storm within a war. Weather on top of destruction, rain on top of trauma, cold on top of grief. If you're watching this, let their story reach your heart. Let their strength be seen. Let their suffering be known. Because silence helps no one survive a storm like this.